I've mentioned that I've started getting into the habit of watching State Department briefings, or for that matter, White House briefings. I am enamored by these things. It's like propaganda in the old days. The wild part about it is the United States always argues, hey, we are independent media, we don't have state media, but is that true in practice? I mean, think of the complicity in mainstream media with maintaining an American perspective. In fact, I'm going to show you the American perspective at work where the guy is so confused. It's the funniest thing on earth. He gets her correctly, meaning I don't know if he planned to ask the question in this framing, but the way he asked the question is so innocent for the first time, it creates a locked door, meaning the question that comes after that, if you answer that question a certain way, it doesn't make sense. And so Jen Psaki, not realizing this, just gives this standard line that she was expecting to give. And the reporter is so confused. And he keeps asking her over and over again, basically the same question because he is utterly confused. And it's like, dude, your confusion is that she's lying to you. They can't. I always ask, are they lying or are they incompetent? I think some of them are actually incompetent. Like that they so fervently believe that America cares about human rights. Look, we use human rights as a club. This was the Tillerson memo, and this is exactly how foreign policy works from the standpoint of the U.S. There is no such thing as international law. International law is basically whatever larger powers come together and agree that that law is, and they impose that on the rest of the world. The countries that aren't strong enough to push back on that are subject to that will. For the other smaller African nations, if they kill a few thousand people, they will be hauled before the criminal court. But no, the larger nations, the criminal court can't do squat, meaning there is no such thing as international law. All things being equal, the only thing that exists are things, meaning physical matter, reality, and the forces that act on those things. Will and human intention being one of them. But you must understand what that means. There is nothing. There's no God. There's no anything. It's just a void that is out there. And we can kill ourselves. We can maim, murder, massacre. Nothing cares. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It matters to us. And that's kind of the catch. And that's kind of the point. I guess you could say that's the good part and the bad part. There's nothing to stop the people with that particular point of view that I've just articulated, because that's honest and real point of view. Well, they can say nothing matters. Good, bad, right, wrong, none of that stuff matters. We shape an image of ourselves while we pursue our objectives. And if that means a lot of people die in the process, fair enough. The media is not going to think anything different because, again, we are going to carry a particular perspective. We're never going to earnestly talk about that stuff in the way that Donald Trump did. Yeah, we're going to steal the oil. Burning the crops. That's right, I said burn the crops. Presidents don't typically talk about stuff like that. Donald Trump comes out and says, yeah, Obama tried to knock down the Syrian government and kill 500,000 people in the process of doing it. That was true, by the way. They don't typically implicate other presidents. They tend to be hush about that stuff, and the media tends to basically be hush about it with them. And I never could tell entirely whether they were lying or whether they were just incompetent. And I think it's a little bit of both. In this guy's case, I think he really is just incompetent. He has that American perspective blind spot. And so it never would occur to him that the United States would be lying to articulate a perspective for various foreign policy, geopolitical objectives. Just like there were certain geopolitical objectives with the kill squads that were in South America, or the terrorists that were pushing in Syria, or et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we use these guys to destabilize various governments in various countries. That's what we do. That is the modus operandi, especially countries that we consider to be enemies of ours. China has hit the stage as a major competitor to the United States. It's a competitor that I don't think the United States knows basically how to put the horse back into the barn, and I don't think there is a way to get the horse back into the barn. That horse is out. Their relationship with Russia is going to stabilize them that much more. The relationships that they've been creating around the world, they've been spreading their money around, allowing people to basically build their societies. We have spent the last 20 years blowing shit up in the Middle East, killing, maiming, and create rivers of blood, despite the fact that the mainstream media no way would talk about it in those terms. We talk about it in terms as if it's our right. It's rabidly racist, but they don't see it that way. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. Our interests in many of these things are craven. It really does boil down to, what do we want? Mohammed bin Salman, yes, he's a theocratic thug on the likes of a Tony Soprano, that just so happens to have access to huge amounts of weapons and keeps that area underfoot. Not to mention the coordination with Israel in order to minimize Iran and those type of things in that particular region. But crucifixions, beheadings, yes, that guy, he's a thug. He just had a guy deboned in an embassy while his fiance waited outside. It is clear at this point, we still do business with him. They're out there bombing Yemen right now. The United States was supporting, apparently in these kind of secret missions in one case, but also with weapons to the hilt, helping them on those bombing runs as they kill kids, bomb schools, bombs hospitals, all with our help, all with our assistance. And the war in and of itself was even started when Obama gave the green light to Yemen, to the Saudi Arabia, to invade another country in order to put back the government that it itself wanted. It's astonishing. The media doesn't talk about it in those terms. They don't talk about it in terms of, is it right for us to even be bombing another country that we haven't been attacked by? There's no, there's nothing that they can even hit us on that's nowhere near us. No, doesn't come up. Don't care. Doesn't matter. Biden kills 22 people in Syria, 22 Iraqis from a group that the New York Times even admits we don't even know if we're associated with Iran. And there's a secondary question of, should the United States be launching missile strikes when we have not at war with any of these parties? We tried to knock over a government. It is understood we tried to knock over a government that is against our laws, that is against international law. We use threats constantly. We use sanctions as acts of war in order to kill tens of thousands of human beings. And what does the media do? They look at those things as if it's the most natural policy in the world. And they're shocked that the kill lists get longer. They're shocked that people keep showing up at our border, despite the fact we're knocking over various governments that we don't particularly like. Right now, the media is lying about what took place in Bolivia. The military told the elected leader of a country that won by 10 points to kick rocks. Kick rocks. He would be shot, prosecuted, potentially even killed. Not to mention the massacres and everything else that took place. The United States couldn't call it a coup. The media couldn't call it a coup because the United States was involved in pushing the OAS. Not to mention the want for the lithium reserves, the disliking of Evo Morales. He's one of those troublesome lefties, just like Hugo Chavez, somebody else who they didn't particularly like. I am making the point that they couldn't call it a coup and they can't talk about it honestly now because we had interest. And the fact that we had interest changes the perspective of media in and of itself in the way that they report that news. People are fed nonsense, bias, dropping of context constantly. And that is what we get for news. And that is what we get as a prevailing opinion. And anything else that adds that context is called propaganda. Meaning, if I give you a large contextual view of your world where you can say, oh, okay, now I see. This is why other countries behave in the way that they're behaving. They're kind of acting in a similar way that we're acting, where all of these things are just kind of a grab bag, where it's a free-for-all of countries that are just kind of fighting for their interests. Yes, that's more true. As opposed to, we are freedom, love, and light, and all of these countries keep attacking us. The Chinese are attacking us. The Russians are attacking us. The Cubans are attacking us. Venezuelans are attacking us. Everybody is attacking us. Everybody is trying to hack into our elections. Do you think it's weird that supposedly everybody around the world is attacking the United States? We're supposedly the weakest thing ever. And on top of that, we're spending $1 trillion. We have hundreds of military bases. We're saying China is being aggressive. China has like one military base, not to mention a few bases around its main land, as opposed to the bombing and killing in the various regions of the world. That's not weird to you. That's not strange. Should be strange. Yet, from the standpoint of mainstream media, It's the most normal thing in the world. I'm going to show you Psaki asked the question about what is taking place from a standpoint of interaction with China. Blinken was told point blank, basically, go fuck yourself. You're not the person who is the dominant partner in this relationship where you can dictate terms. China, yeah, they're feeling themselves, and they should be feeling themselves. They're grown exceptionally. They're putting forth a policy in order to get rid of poverty. They're talking about building a base on the moon with the Russians. And if you really think about it, the amount of military technology that the Russians have, and that acumen in that sense, with the combination of the might of China in regards to the economic might, their ability of infrastructure and everything else, that's a dominant party. And the rest of the world, especially these two, are going to work together. And on some level, they're pushed to work together just because of the way that the United States and the EU are working. Yeah, that's a dominant party. One of the other points, China's point of view. I don't think they look at the world in zero-sum terms in the way that I think I look at the world and the U.S. look at the world. Whether people are as craven as they overtly know that they're going to get a lot of people killed in order to advance a certain political perspective, I think on some level they are. They would never say it. I think on some level they are. Is irrelevant. Whether they know it overtly or whether they're implicit, it doesn't matter. They're still, at the end of the day, their emotions are going towards, we want to get XYZ accomplished because we believe it is our right to do so. Psaki is going to be asked the question. It seems innocent, but it has monstrous consequences for the rest of what she is saying. And like I said, this reporter here is utterly and entirely confused. It is fascinating to watch. Welcome to the soapbox. Oh, by the way, the problem is she's admitting to working with a country that is actively committing genocide. Actively committing genocide. And he doesn't understand how she's working with the country that is actively committing genocide. You'll see what I mean. Welcome to the soapbox. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. If you guys enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Yeah, I just saw on the thing that apparently it's not just my show. I don't know if you noticed, the views for my show have dropped precipitously, almost 75%, give or take, from the norm than what it would typically is. Also, the subscriber count also. I noticed, though, that apparently it's not just me. Cal and many of the other lefty networks are also enduring this kind of same hit from YouTube. Whatever they're doing with the algorithm, whatever changes or adjustments they're making, they're basically trying to push out a contingent of the channels. So support the channels that you like, either through views or, for that matter, or through, dollar here, dollar there. We like to say everything helps. Let's go to the briefing. I'm not going to delay.
What came from it, and where does it leave the countries now going forward? For instance, is the prospect of some sort of bilateral meeting between President Biden and President Xi now more or less likely? Is there anything you can give us on that?
Well, we expected tough and direct talks with the PRC on a wide range of issues, and that's exactly what happened. And I know there's been a lot of focus on some of the public theatrics or more dramatic public piece, but I can assure you from talking to our national security team that it was a substantive meeting. It was a 2-day meeting. They covered a range of issues from our concerns about human rights abuses to aggression in Hong Kong, Taiwan, our concerns there, our concerns about economic and intellectual property. And we also, of course, talk about ways we can work together. So we're taking stock of where we are. This is where we are now. I expect the president will certainly be talking with his national security team. Well, Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, who traveled, and we will have close consultation with allies and partners on the way forward. We'll continue to work with China, of course, going forward, where it's in the interest of the American people. But in terms of the next steps, Anchorage was a standalone meeting, and we don't have anything more to determine about what's next.
All right. We'll continue to work with China. insofar as it in the interest of the American people. But more importantly, we'll continue to work with China. And then later on, she says it again, in the interest of the American people. All right, that's important. Let's keep going. You're working with China. You have disagreements, but you're indeed working with China. And by the way, to make this point that much more plain, the United States still has a huge trade relationship with China. China is our third largest trade partner. So, regardless of all of this back and forth and sanctions and everything else, the EU and the United States has just passed sanctions on China. China retaliated immediately because it's tit for tat. They have to. If China is indeed a major nation, they're not going to take a lesson from other nations, especially nations that they may be considered crumbling at this point, from the standpoint of an inability to do basic fucking things like keep their own society healthy, or not dying from an illness. But she's basically saying, yes, we're working with China. Let's keep going. Oh, great picture, great picture. 2120, great picture. 2120. All right.
Today, the U.S., EU, and other countries announced new sanctions on China with respect to human rights abuses. Did anything that happened in Anchorage affect that? In other words, would the U.S. have not participated in that had certain conditions been met? Is there any link between the two? And what next steps do you think? China has retaliated against the EU. Do you expect U.S. retaliation? And is there any more sanctions that you would do if they don't act to change course with respect to the treatment of these minority groups?
Well, on the first question, I'm not aware of any linkage or plans to pull that back. Obviously, this was a reaction to what we felt were serious human rights abuses. Obviously, the Europeans felt this as well against members of Xinjiang's ethnic and religious minority groups. No meeting would change our concerns related to that. And we took action, as you noted, in unity with the United Kingdom, Canada, and the European Union, who also acted against human rights abusers in connection with these atrocities. This demonstrates our ongoing commitment to work multilaterally to advance respect for human rights. And we continue to have grave concerns about China's crimes against humanity and genocide on Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But I don't have anything to predict for you on future sanctions. Obviously, this is an issue that was raised in this meeting last week and was an issue that was raised by the president in his conversation with President Xi just a few weeks ago.
So wait. And at this point, he realizes, wait, that doesn't make sense. Because built into his question, whether you realize it or not, was this notion of what's next? You've just stated that a country is committing genocide against a minority population. Let's say like the Rohingyas in Myanmar, for example. But in this case, you're saying that China is actively murdering, killing Uyghurs, crimes against humanity, genocide. That's what that means. Wiping out a particular line of human beings. So that's what you're saying. But you're also simultaneously saying that the United States is going to continue its relationship with that same country that is basically committing genocide. So, logically, if indeed that is what is taking place and there's this urgency act because of the number of people who are being murdered and massacred, what's next? What are the next sanctions? What else are you going to do to help those Uyghurs in that situation? And that's what she doesn't quite get that he's getting at. You're saying that the worst of our actions is taking place. And yet, they're a third trading partner. You don't see an incongruity with that. He does, but he can't quite put his finger on it. Let's keep going.
What will the U.S. do, if anything, if China doesn't change its approach? Is this sort of a one-stop sanction, or down the road will this be revisited and are further sanctions possible? I mean, they've given no indication that they would change approach. In fact, they have more or less doubled down that they're doing nothing wrong with respect to these minority groups. Well,
clearly sanctions are meant to deter behavior, but I'm not going to rule in or rule out any actions.
Her answer is yes. Her answer is yes. Basically, one stop. I don't know what's next. We're just trying to deter the behavior. But notice he says, they're like doubling down. They don't seem to, Blinken was told to go fuck himself. What's next? They're committing genocide, right? And she's like, look, I mean, I'm not going to say that anything is coming down the pike later or not coming down the pike later. I'm just, what we got is what we got. I have nothing else to give you. He's confused. Why wouldn't he be confused? They're committing genocide, but we're going to continue this relationship. We're going to have a third trading partner. And we're going to pass a few sanctions that at the end of the day probably don't necessarily mean anything. They're just sanctions, especially when they're talking about big nations like this. They are a third trading partner. And like I said, China retaliated almost immediately with those sanctions. It's just weird, that's all. The truth of the matter is, how many Uyghurs are there? Reuters is saying that there are like 1 million Uyghurs that are put into camps, or that they call them camps. All of this is based off the research of like one guy. And that one guy is clearly politically motivated. The United States doesn't give a shit about it. The media doesn't care to ask. And for all intents and purposes, goes in line with U.S. foreign policy interests. Whether you want to say the CIA, whether you want to say special groups, I don't necessarily think it matters. Somebody found something, they blew it up, and they used that as their rationale and justification to categorize what is taking place in a particular area of China, despite the fact that none of these people have been there to even know. It's fascinating. I would say this, we have killed more Muslims than are being estimated in those camps. Put this shit in perspective. From the context of Iraq, 1 million? In the context of Syria, 500,000. How many in Libya? God knows, let's say 10, 15,000. The number in Iran from those sanctions, let's say 10,000. I mean, God's sake, you can go down the list. Not to mention the ones that have died in the migrations over into Europe. We've killed more Muslims. 500,000 babies and children in Iraq, just based on the sanctions that was put in Iraq. We killed twice as many more Muslims as that they're accusing China of being in those camps. What number does it take to be called the genocide? And is the United States the only party that is allowed to do that and call something a genocide? Can China point and say, hey, look at the number of black people you have in those jails. Look at the number of people you have in general in those jails. Look at the number of people you've killed. What they should do is open up an inquiry into the Iraq War. That's what they should do, considering that that is basically around this time. And they should open up an inquiry into all the other wars and basically put their evidence out for the world. The world is not going to care because the world basically already knows what is taking place, that this stuff, there's no such thing as foreign international law. That these guys are acting in their craven interests in order to accomplish what they want, and they have a media arm in order to basically codify it and make it seem okay. I suspect this is how things were taking place when they were murdering the Native Americans. You would have the media, just like the media is right now. They would see that taking place and they would blame the Native Americans as being hostile. It's instructive to see and notice. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Oh, by the way, right here, I forgot. State Department lawyers concluded insufficient evidence to prove genocide in China. And even when you go to Reuters, and U.S. Commission says possibly committed genocide against Xinjiang Muslims. But like I said, 1 million Uyghurs. And I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying I have no idea what is going on. And I do know that the U.S. uses propaganda and stuff like that for their own political ambitions. And I do know that China is, at this point, an adversary. And yes, just like they use the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, they would use the Uyghurs to try to create some kind of internal rebellion, just like in Hong Kong, just like in Syria, etc., etc. It's basically playbook at this point. China says the so-called genocide is rumored deliberately started by some anti-Chinese forces as a farce to discredit China. Yeah, agreed. As I went down through this, it says, as referring to a report about Xinjiang by German researcher Adrian Zenz. And then it's like, oh, here we go. This guy's full of shit. And they're acting as if this guy's some kind of independent researcher. Nonsense. And the wild part is none of them even give a shit to even look to figure out whether it is true. It's like they're just running with it. They build upon something that is entirely unestablished and run with it. It's very strange. Like, share, and subscribe.